motion picture you are about to see is a story of the worst natural disaster in our nation's history, Hurricane Agnes. But more than that, it's the story of the combined efforts of the United States Army, its Corps of Engineers, the National Guard, and Army Reserves in combating the wrath of an unpredictable Mother Nature. Agnes started as a tropical storm in the Caribbean, but was upgraded to a hurricane when she crossed Florida on June 19, 1972. Downgraded to a tropical storm, she caused little damage in Georgia and South Carolina. Flooding, however, occurred in North Carolina as Agnes moved into the Atlantic. Agnes increased in intensity before veering slowly into western Pennsylvania and finally into New York. The toll of Agnes's fury stood at 112 dead, 400,000 homeless, and $3.5 billion in property damage, with Pennsylvania suffering the most destruction. By June 23rd, President Nixon had declared parts of Florida, Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York to be major disaster areas. Although her velocity had decreased to 55 miles per hour, the rains Agnes generated as she blew back over the coast from the ocean caused record-breaking floods. The Susquehanna at Wilkes-Barre and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the James at Cartersville and Richmond, Virginia, and the Genesee River at Portageville, New York, were among those streams experiencing the most disastrous swelling. The Susquehanna River, growing 45 times wider than normal, twice crested 7½ feet above the previous flood record. One of her 3-foot wide streamlets became a 110-foot wide torrent, ripping a swath across Highway 2 near Wilkes-Barre. Another Susquehanna tributary, the Chemung River at Chemung, New York, destroyed its stream gauge when it more than doubled its previous record flow. The James River at Richmond, peaking more than 4 feet higher than ever before, coupled with the flooding of the Potomac, Roanoke, Shenandoah, and Rappahannock rivers, helped inundate widespread areas of Virginia. With hundreds of counties in immediate need of restoration of public utilities, Lieutenant General F.J. Clark, the Chief of Engineers, discussed with the Secretary of the Army the need for officer personnel to augment the Corps' recovery forces. As the storm's magnitude was still being assessed, the Director of Military Support was briefed of the urgent need for additional personnel to help expedite the mobilization effort. The devastation wrought by the floods was staggering. The main street at Wilkes-Barre, hardest hit of any city in the storm's path, was under 20 feet of water. Hundreds of thousands of homes and business establishments were destroyed or damaged. In Pennsylvania alone, 100,000 homes were damaged or lost. Thousands of men, women, and children had lost everything and had no place to go. Many were provided temporary shelter, clothing, and food in nearby courthouses and government buildings. Besides homes damaged or lost, 5,800 businesses were completely demolished, along with 2,400 farm buildings. Electricity, water, gas, fuel lines, and sewage disposal facilities were rendered inoperable. Telephones were knocked out for weeks, pressing mobile Army radios, National Guard communication networks, and emergency ham operators into service. Transportation was brought to a standstill as Agnes wiped out 1,400 locomotives, 4,400 freight cars, 130 bridges, and countless highways throughout the 7-state area. While flying over the stricken areas, Lieutenant General Clark estimated that at least 100 company-grade and 20 field-grade officers would be immediately needed. CONARC, the Continental Army Command, was briefed on the situation and participated in the recovery effort through the 1st Army and Fort Belvoir, Virginia. The Office of Emergency Task Force with major responsibility in emergency operations. All of the emergency operations centers established by the Corps of Engineers operated round the clock 7 days a week. The one in the office, Chief of Engineers, was under the direction of Major General John W. Morris, Director of Civil Works. He briefed the scores of officers from Fort Belvoir on June 25th, and they departed immediately for a variety of assignments throughout the stricken areas. Defense Civil Preparedness Agency and units of the active Army, National Guard, and Army Reserves joined with the Corps in the recovery task. The 76th Engineer Battalion, an active Army unit from Fort Meade, was equipped with bridging equipment to complement recovery operations in the Baltimore area. The 121st Engineer Battalion of the Maryland National Guard also conducted emergency operations. Since the fury of Agnes's flooding was concentrated in the Northeast, the division engineer of the North Atlantic Division, Major General Richard H. Groves, served as coordinator for emergency operations in the New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Norfolk districts. Each district developed an estimate of its civilian personnel requirements, consisting mainly of engineers, construction inspectors, and contract administrators. Engineers from the North Atlantic Division surveyed damages to private and public buildings in the stricken areas on a county-by-county basis for the Office of Emergency Preparedness coordinating officers. Within a week, 65 contracts had been awarded to civilian contractors. 3 weeks later, 1,070 contracts were underway at a cost of nearly $20 million. Eventually, over 4,500 contracts totaling over $103 million were awarded to private contractors by the Corps of Engineers. The Corps supervised the contractors in debris removal and the restoration of public facilities, including electricity, water, and sanitation. 550 experienced civilian disaster workers from throughout the Corps were eventually assigned to the various field offices for differing periods of time. Besides technical engineering assistance, legal, fiscal, administrative, and procurement, personnel were also required to implement the recovery effort while maintaining the Corps' regular workflow. While the 76th Engineer Battalion commenced work on debris removal and road repair in the Baltimore area, elements of the Pennsylvania National Guard's 28th Infantry Division were joining civilian equipment operators in the Susquehanna area. Active Army units from New York to North Carolina were involved in the cleanup operation. Even cemeteries were not spared Agnes's fury, and caskets had to be returned to their burial grounds. Mud, trees, cars, houses, discarded personal effects, and other flotsam of every conceivable size and nature were loaded and transported to emergency landfills. Particularly in the Pennsylvania and New York areas, road repair and water supply activities were immediately initiated. Since almost all food and medical supplies in commercial stores were lost during the disaster, it was necessary for military personnel to airlift new supplies into the stricken areas. Water was tested to make sure it was safe for drinking and was distributed at convenient locations throughout the disaster areas. The National Guard was called upon to provide traffic control, which had become an overwhelming problem. Transportation efforts were paralyzed by the destruction of 130 bridges until the 76th Engineer Battalion from Fort Meade installed over 35 temporary Bailey bridges throughout the flooded area. These Bailey bridges, which were stockpiled in Army depots from as far away as Ohio, were promptly shipped into strategic locations in the flooded areas. Easily assembled from an erector set principle, these bridges enabled enormous quantities of food, water, medical supplies, and other materials to be quickly shipped to areas isolated by the flooding. Providing adequate housing for those whose homes had been damaged or destroyed proved to be the most arduous and time-consuming problem for the recovery forces. The Corps worked with state and local officials to secure adequate sites for trailer parks for the displaced thousands. It built the trailer park pads and provided utilities such as water and electricity for the temporary trailer towns. The Department of Housing and Urban Development provided the trailers. In 11 weeks, the Corps provided over 6,800 different sites for those whose homes had been destroyed. At the direction of Office of Emergency Preparedness, the Corps supervised repairs to houses which could be made ready for emergency living by restoring water, heat, and electricity at a cost not to exceed $3,000 per house. About 4,000 houses were winterized through this mini repair program at a cost in excess of $10 million. While Hurricane Agnes proved to be the worst natural disaster in American history, over $1.5 billion in damages were averted thanks to the Corps' already completed flood control projects. 10 completed reservoirs in the Allegheny and Monongahela River basins above Pittsburgh saved an estimated $800 million in damages. Such was not the case in 1936. This is Pittsburgh during the great flood of that year, surrendering to ravaging rivers gone mad. A feeble flood fight amounted to watching and waiting for the Ohio, Allegheny, and Monongahela rivers to recede, and then picking up the pieces and starting all over again. Agnes came to Pittsburgh and was treated like any other rainstorm. Umbrellas and raincoats announced her visit, but otherwise it was life and business as usual, except for some minor damage. The flood that didn't happen was being contained in reservoirs which kept the peace on the Ohio, Allegheny, and Monongahela rivers. Pittsburgh's Golden Triangle, its suburbs and surrounding lands, sent Agnes on her way with only wet pavements in her wake. There are lessons to be learned from Hurricane Agnes. That man must stop crowding our rivers and streams by building in the floodplain. And where man has foolishly invaded the floodplain with major development, A flood control system is essential to the protection of life and property.